Over the years, the Mad Max movies and the Warner Bros. Mad Max game of 2015 all have standalone stories, and it always confused me as to why was he actually called Mad Max. In some of the movies, the term mad is clearly referring to Max being angry and hell-bent on revenge, whereas the latest Mad Max movie, Fury Road, Tom Hardy's portrayal of Max is clearly leaning more towards the insane meaning of the word.
Max? How are you, Max?
Personally, I prefer Max having a few screws loose, and Warner Bros. Attempted to send Max down the same unstable road of insanity in the Mad Max game too, but it felt like a bit of a swing and a miss. Don't get me wrong, you shouldn't exactly be playing Mad Max for the riveting plotline and inspirational writing, and I don't know whether it was Max's personality simply being washed out against the barn pot lunacy of the maniac enemies in the game that come up with names like dangling man killers and are more than happy to name themselves after a scrotum, but even so, Max never seemed truly mad, and that's definitely what they were going for. Max will regularly come across the mysterious character known as Griffer, who offers Max skill upgrades with Griffer tokens which can be earned by completing challenges throughout the game, but there's strong implications that Griffer doesn't actually exist, as Max insists on meeting him on his own, and the strange graffiti on the walls around Griffer's locations will mysteriously vanish after meeting with him. The collectibles in the game are almost Max's medication to fighting away the insanity, where he'd pick up a photograph of something that was an example of the world that once was, reminding Max of a time he once knew before the global nuclear exchange in the fight for oil, which wiped out the majority of the world that we can see in these photographs, and a world that Max so obviously misses. This is great, but the actual writing of the character Max never really went that deep into the state of his mind. He still played really well as the rugged, no-nonsense hardass, which is the majority of his personality, but we never saw enough of Mad Max. It was more the mildly irritated Max.
That's it, mister. I am disgruntled. And up until now, I was relatively gruntled.
Like I said though, I imagine this isn't why you'd pick up this game to begin with, and it certainly wasn't why I picked it up, and I've just finished my third playthrough since it released back in 2015. You're going to be probably picking this up for some straight from the shoulder, bone-crunching, badass face-to-face conflict and the sprawling open-world wasteland that provides the perfect, desolate playground for some jaw-dropping, thunder-bastard vehicle combat. The combat is pretty similar to other Avalanche and Warner Bros. Games at its core in how it feels. Standard and heavy attacks alongside blocks, perfect parries and evading. During fights, Max will build up his fury, and once filled, he'll unleash some brutally crunching moves on his enemies. Certain enemies carry shivs and melee weapons which initially can only be evaded, but you can disarm them, as well as eventually unlocking skills to counter them and use their shivs and melee weapons against them. And we're also given a double barrel shotgun from the get-go with very limited ammo, and it's mainly used to get you out of a tight spot or putting the more difficult or out of reach enemies down a little bit quicker. Eventually we'll gain access to my favourite tool in the game too, and that's the Thunder Stick. It's basically a javelin with the bomb stuck to the end, and it's so much fun to use. But let me tell you, the combat system on the whole has such top drawer, bone fracturing audio effects, amazing body animations at times, and really rewarding slow motion visuals for when you finally finish off the fight. I mean, it's as satisfying as it gets when it comes to an open world third person combat game like this, and I can't really think of many games that are more convincing or as satisfying as Mad Max is when you chain together a massive combo and put that last psycho on his arse with a slow motion spine splintering suplex. Without fail, every time I execute a sweet move like that, I can just hear that little voice in my brain screaming at my left ear and my right ear in pure gratification. One aspect of the combat that does differ from other Warner Brother games like the Batman series is your attacks register and can't be cancelled to block or perfect parry. I actually quite like this. It feels a lot more grounded in realism compared to Batman flying across the room to parry with one button press. It adds a certain degree of difficulty to the combat and it makes it a lot less button bashy and a little more calculated. As for the vehicle combat though, this is where Mad Max really shines. I've got to stress the combat though, not the driving. There is a difference because as you'd expect, each vehicle feels different to drive, but the feel of driving any vehicle from A to B isn't that great. They either excessively over or understeer, which feels purposeful just for the sake of certain cars feeling different to drive, whereas the Magnum Opus feels tightly gripped to the roads like it's on Scalextrics. You rarely get a moment alone on the roads though, and that's why the feel of the vehicle combat with the Magnum Opus feels so good. It's all geared towards the combat, so the player can focus a little less on driving and more on taking out a convoy of fire-breathing rustic monsters on wheels. Using the harpoon will likely be your most common tactic. Ripping off doors and yanking drivers out of their seats is as cool as it gets, and the harpoon can even be used during exploration too to expose hidden locations containing valuable scrap, which is the game's currency. You'll even use the harpoon to take down the territory's scarecrows or pull down the enemy's camp gates and other defences. It's the head-on combat on the desert roads though, and it's another huge tick in the box of satisfaction when ripping apart the different factions' army of cars piece by piece to eventually seeing a blazing explosion as their vehicles go up in flames. The whole journey from start to finish is focused on the development of the Magnum Opus with the help of everyone's favourite grease monkey, Chum Bucket. At the start of the game, Max is robbed and left for dead as he journeys to the Plains of Silence, and after befriending good old Chum Bucket and his new feline friend, together they set off on a quest to rebuild the Magnum Opus from scratch, and it's up to you, the player, where you choose to invest your scrap and customise the car to your liking. There's a huge difference between the feel of the first journey in the Magnum Opus to the last journey at the end of the game, as each upgrade adds a noticeable difference to how it operates. The game is not without its flaws though, and the biggest is down to what was a popular game design technique in 2015, that being open world fluff. I don't think I've ever been quite as offended by this game design as some people have. I've felt like I've had quite a high tolerance for it to be honest, but it was probably playing Spider-Man Miles Morales when I first felt like, yeah, you know what, this game design has started to wear a little thin now. I used to really enjoy moving from territory to territory, ticking off all the available side activities and locations for looting, and if you're still okay with this, then Mad Max is an absolute must because there's a shed load of side content, but this being my third playthrough of Mad Max, I was bored of ticking off the activities by the first territory and focused on the meat of the main storyline instead. Now this is where my second criticism comes in, because there are some side quests in the game that are essential to progressing the main overarching plotline, which again is another example of a game design falling foul to the bad habits of the time and habits that are still being pushed into games of today. This doesn't make Mad Max a bad game by any stretch, because you have to remember how popular this game design was in 2015 with gamers and developers, but 7 years later you might feel a little bored like I did. There's way more to love here than to hate though, and I'm not a fan of the word underrated because of how much that word is used in the wrong context, but Mad Max probably deserves the label of an underrated game. The combat is so rewarding, both hand to hand and on the roads. There's a ton to explore and it's well worth your time going out exploring if you're playing for the first time. As for the soundtrack, this gave me mixed vibes if I'm honest, because standalone it's incredible and typical of the Warner Brothers standard of quality. There's this constant gritty brass drone fitting perfectly when out exploring, and during the combat the intensity picks it up a notch with cinematic strings and orchestral pieces, again typical to Warner Brothers, but I wasn't quite sure this theme fitted quite as well as it would say in a Batman game. The fast-paced violin strokes over solemn brass notes didn't quite feel at home against the contrast of a harsh desert setting and rustic cars crunching their metalwork together. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit picky there, but the overall progression of both Max's skills as well as the development of the Magnum Opus is notable and really rewarding. Visually it's still holding up pretty well too, and the attention to detail like the whistling wind passing over and through the magnum opus as you reach its top speed and Max limping after taking a big fall, these are the sort of details that always deserve appreciation. Overall, I'm a little bit gutted that Mad Max wasn't treated with a little more aftercare since its release. No DLC or any news of a much deserving sequel, which is a shame really, but if you've never played it before, I'd definitely recommend it, and if you already have, I'd love to hear about what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.